Adjusted Reality, a podcast series trusted by the adjusted and brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, where we learn from athletes, celebrities, influencers, and healthcare professionals about how to optimize health in a fun, relatable way. Join me, Dr. Sherry McAllister, as I speak to Eric Kussin, the founder of We're All a Little, quote, Crazy, about finding hope during complete burnout, what to do when you feel like you've exhausted all your options. Eric Kussin is a 15-year professional sports executive and the founder of We're All a Little, quote, Crazy, a nonprofit with a mission of bringing together athletes, celebrities, and expert practitioners, which leads the global movement. Hashtag same here. After a very successful career that started at the NBA league office and led to senior management positions with a number of professional sports teams, Eric's health took a sudden and rapid decline. Once he found a way to climb out of his abyss, he vowed to spend the rest of his life focused on changing the global conversation through mental health advocacy. It wasn't until he met practitioners who taught him methods to actually heal his body and central nervous system that he actually began to improve and get back to life. So we are so pleased to have him with us today. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Dr. Sherry. And when I hear the bio read back, sometimes you just like, you're like, oh, I don't, not that much needs to be known. So I appreciate it. It's humbling to be introduced and be a part of your show.
We're delighted to have you. And I know our audience today is going to kind of have a deep dive into reality. And that's what this podcast is all about. You've had a very challenging life experience. And I want to really start off with asking you to kind of bring us to a place where things just really went wrong. What led up to where you felt that burnout stage?
Yeah, I think the interesting way to share the story, because I'll go into the place where the burnout was coming over me. You mentioned the 15 years in professional sports. So from an outsider's perspective, you're looking at what I'm doing and you're saying, wow, NBA league office, number of NBA teams, number of NHL teams. And by the time I'm 34 years old, I'm taking on this role, the title is Chief Revenue Officer, right? In this rat race that we're in here in the US, and I know in other countries as well, but certainly here in the US, it's what's your next level? You go from assistant to manager to director to VP to senior VP to C-level executive, right? And so from an outsider's perspective, things are great, but I'll share this also. From an insider's perspective, I didn't feel like there was anything wrong. If you were looking at me and you were saying, what's the trajectory of Eric's life? I moved to Miami, working for the Florida Panthers. I'm a single guy in a new market, getting a chance to have a new ownership group that just purchased a team and allowed us to build the staff from scratch. And things couldn't be better until something happened, right? And so the something that happened was about 5 months into my tenure there, I started to lose interest in things outside of the office. And so it was things like hanging out with friends, going to the gym, going on dates, watching my teams on TV, playing in my own rec league games. And I think what we do as executives in any field, right? Mine was sports, but in any field, we become so attuned to believing that our identity is caught up in what we do from a day-to-day standpoint. And we get that dopamine hit waking up every single morning being like, I'm Susie, the lawyer, the partner at this firm. This brings me purpose, right? And I go and I do this every single day. So even though those other things were escaping me, what did I do? Because I knew nothing about mental health at the time. Well, I'm able to function at work. So even though those other things don't interest me right now, instead of getting in at 7 in the morning, I'm going to get in at 6:45. Instead of leaving at 12 at night after, 12 in the morning, but after a game, I'm going to leave at 12:30, 1 o'clock. Right. And I did that for about a 2-week period until I woke up one morning and it felt like I was pushing myself out of quicksand to get out of bed. Like I had cinder blocks on my feet to walk to the closet to check out, what I was supposed to wear. And I remember getting in the closet, and the first real attempt or understanding that this wasn't just a physical thing I was feeling, that it was truly mental, is I looked around the closet where everything was organized, but it looked like a bomb had gone off in there. And I couldn't make out, should I wear a t-shirt like this? Should I wear a button down? Should I wear a belt? What belt goes with what shoes? And I think what we do when our brain starts to go offline, we test ourselves. And I remember looking at this picture of my nieces, the two most important little people in the world to me. And I was testing myself. Okay, their first names are Rebecca and Kaylee. What are their middle names? And I couldn't recall what their middle names were.
Wow.
These are kids that I speak to, every other day on FaceTime. And so, just to take you through the burnout portion of it, and then we can go into the rest of it, is I went to the office that day because I think that's what a lot of people do. I'm not going to go to the doctor. Why go to the doctor if where I find my groove is at the office? Let me get into the office and I'll get back into that groove. And I got into my office somehow. I have no clue how I even drove there. And I closed the door, which I never do. I always leave the door open. We had a wall window that was able to look out over the staff. And I remember looking at everyone else out there, and it looked like Grand Central Station to me. Like almost everyone was moving in all different directions, all different speeds. And I looked at my computer. I think the people who are old enough to know this reference can get it. Is my computer, instead of looking like even lines in an email, it looked like light brights. Okay. Like they were jumping off the screen at me. And that night I was supposed to give a speech, because that's what we would do when we would have prospects come in the building, is you give a speech to talk about why they should join the team as a season ticket holder, as a corporate partner. And even as I'm telling you this story 5 or 6 years later now, I can recall what I should have said at that point. New ownership group. We just drafted Alexander Barkov and Jonathan Huberdeau, and Roberto Luongo is still our goalie, and we're the way that we're interacting with the market is a much friendlier way, right? Well, this group comes in the suite, and I have to read off an index card. Hi, my name is Eric Kussin. I'm the chief revenue officer here with the Panthers. It's great to meet you. And my brain just stopped at that point. Now, fortunately, my team president was in the suite with me, and I said, Matt's going to take it from here. And I went back to my office, and I sat there staring at a blank screen for the rest of the game. And Matt, who's got a military background, and our owner, Vinny, who's got a military background, both West Point grads, they knew something was up, and they came in my office. They said, Eric, whatever we can do to help you. Now, this is 2015. So this is props to them that they had the comforting way about them to say this. And I think maybe the military background was part of it, but they said, Eric, we know something's up. How can we help you? And I said, guys, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I had an aneurysm, if I have a brain tumor in here, if I had traumatic brain injuries when I was younger and it's now just manifesting, if it's this thing called mental health, but like my brain's not working. I not only can't be a good employee for you, I can't even be a good human being for myself. And by the way that I'm describing that right now is not the way that I was describing it back then. It was just a mishmash of words.
Sure. And
Vinny said, take as much time as you need, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, get yourself well and come back and hit the ground running. And I think what your audience will appreciate is, especially when we talk about the chiropractic world, natural ways to heal, I had no idea what that world was. So when I heard 3 months, my mind immediately went to the commercials that I've seen on TV when people have these type of mental health complications. And it was a sad face in a 30-second commercial with a gray cloud above it, and there's rain usually coming down, and they're holding something heavy. That 15 seconds in, the sad face becomes a smiley face, the clouds go away, the sky is blue, the birds are chirping, everything's great, right? Not that I thought that it would be that easy, but we grow up taking this magic pill called an antibiotic when we have strep throat, bronchitis, and pneumonia. So we're indoctrinated into this pattern of when you don't feel right, and listen to how I described getting out of bed, right? Lethargic, run down, beaten up, tired, right? That's very similar to what we feel when we have the strep throat, bronchitis, pneumonia, maybe just not with the same type of symptoms like feeling a sore throat. And so I thought 3 months means, well, you take one of those pills they have on TV, it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get better. Okay, even if the first one doesn't work, the second one will work, or the third one, that's 3 months right there. Who's not going to get better in 3 months? Like, that's a lot of time. Well, P.S., and here's where I'll pause because there's so much left to the rest of the story. I ended up spending 2.5 years laying in a bed, staring at the ceiling, not watching TV, not listening to the radio, just barely answering friends on text messages just to say I'm alive, as these doctors tried over 50 different psychotropic drug combinations on me, TMS therapy, and ultimately shock therapy, and none of those worked for me. So I'll stop there for now. But that was my burnout experience leading up into that 2.5 years of just utter dysfunction.
Eric, this is so incredibly important to have someone share this type of story, because many of us have those symptoms and we don't understand them. And you're right. Your first thing is when you can't concentrate and you've got 50 things on your desk, and all of a sudden one more thing makes you just sit there, and you go into this, I call it the catacombs of chaos. Your brain isn't going in one direction. Many of us have had those moments. And I would probably say many have not even spoken the words out loud to tell someone, hey, have you ever had this moment? So I'm so appreciative that you're willing to open up your life like this and say, here's what really happened. And you fought it, because many men, and I say this with all due respect because the research is out there, they wait till it's catastrophic before they start diving into something. And as a practitioner, a chiropractor myself, having people bring their husbands or uncles come in, and veterans, they typically have that arms folded, what are you going to do to me mentality. And you started deep into this by hitting the wall quickly. And then blessed be those that surrounded you, the ones that really did have the experience of seeing others, like your West Point grads, say, hey, wait a minute, let's find out what's wrong. So now we see you, Eric, on your back, totally lethargic, wondering about passion, purpose, and what's next. And what then are you thinking? Because now you're at a place where, what is wrong with me? And that's a scary and fearful place to be. Tell us now, here you are on your back, deciding what to do next.
Yeah, I think and I'm going to get back to your point, because I think it's such an important one about the symptoms that we feel, so common, because having brain fog, having loss of executive functioning, you described it well, not having a straight thought track, right? And it being kind of all over the place. These are the symptoms of neural circuitry starting to get frayed. Mm-hmm. And yet we justify that as, I went out and I drank a little bit the night before, or
I just need a little more coffee.
I just need a little more coffee, or I need to sleep a little better, which, by the way, that I'm not downplaying how important sleep is, but why do we do that? And it's going to get to a later point in the story. My belief is it's because the caricatures of what mental health is that we've created through the clickbait stories make those of us who are dealing with the day-to-day of what you just described believe that we don't have this thing called moving on a mental health continuum to a place that's starting to get something that we should look into it or be preventative about it. Because I haven't run off a basketball court in a panic attack, or because I haven't shaved my head, I'm not as crazy as those other people, hence the name of the organization. Mm-hmm. I don't need to work on this, right? So to your more direct question, what I do at that point, I only knew from what I'd seen on TV, right? So my thought as I'm in the bed laying there for that 2.5 years, which is the opposite of now what I've learned so much about one of the practices that I use, acceptance and commitment therapy, and being close friends now with Stephen Hayes, who developed that therapy, is I did the opposite. I was laying in my bed without an original thought coming to my mind the entire time, being like, why am I like this? How do I get out of this? This is the worst place to be. And what do we know? You know, as a practitioner, and I've learned from all my practitioners, that's our thoughts on a hamster wheel. That makes the anxiety worse, which makes the symptoms worse, which makes our ability to have cognitive function worse, and keeps us in the same place and worse, going down a spiral, right? Mm-hmm. So the worst place for someone to be is just continuously laying in a bed. But my thought process during that 2.5 year period, because of what we learn when we're younger, is take the med and wait for this thing called a chemical imbalance to even out. And I thought of my brain, not the way that I know it now. I thought of my brain as a soup, and the ingredients of the soup are off. And the medication that they're giving me is trying to make the soup go back to tasting how it's supposed to taste. Right. And that's a scary proposition. Why? Because all of a sudden your mind goes, if you're a deep thinker, well, if one of the ingredients was off before, even when they're putting new ingredients in, they can try and get it kind of back to how it was before, but it'll never return to its normal state. I've already put so many new ingredients in with the 30th medication, and the 35th medication, and the 50th medication. How's it ever going to go back to this thing called normal? You don't think about hardware versus software in your brain, right? You don't think about neurobiology. And so that was one thought. And then the other thought about laying there in the bed was, oh, if I rest more, if I continue to sleep more, sleep is restful, isn't it? That's going to make me better, right? And what you don't realize when you're laying there, because how many times do we see people facing major mental health complications, that the term that I use when I from a peer-to-peer standpoint, when I work with people now, is stagnation breeds stagnation.
It
and
does.
When we stay there and we just, there's no momentum at all. We don't get up. We don't start walking. We don't get the energy, the chi, right? Whatever you want to call it, the pranayama. Like, we don't get that moving throughout our body. Now, all of a sudden, it's staying in the fetal position. And those blockages of those energy highways stay the way that they're blocked. So, hopefully that helps answer what I was doing in that 2.5 years that probably led towards why I stayed that way in that 2.5 years. And so I think it was a combination between the only options that I thought I had were to find the right medication to pop me out of this and to do this thing called talk therapy. And I would challenge anyone to go to any nonprofit website that's a national nonprofit related to mental health and to look up, how do I get better? And you will see the two main therapies to getting better, or the two gold standards, are medication and talk therapy, medication and talk therapy, medication and talk therapy. Meanwhile, I'll tell you right now, there's so many other things beyond that I think not only can be used, but should be used. And they're not at the forefront. And obviously we could have a whole other show about what are the motivations behind that and why is it that those are put at the forefront. But what's challenging and struggling and frustrating, and the reason that drives me to talk every single day, and then happy to share the rest of that story, what I learned about what led to the burnout, if you'll allow me, is, we have people working their ass off to get better without knowing what the options are that are available to them.
Oh, I'm going to stop you right there, because you hit a critical component. Having created discussions across the nation with legislators, politicians, educators, academicians, consumers across the country, just looking at the approach to chronic pain management. And the first thing they think is one of the options is an opiate. So I'd like to kind of dive into those options, but I wanted to just jump back just a moment, because you did note what the audience should pick up, which is, we think we know what we should do, but we don't. And so there's this saying that I have that I hold deep, which is, we can beam opportunities. And beam is actually standing for a body in equilibrium will attain its alignment and mobility if given the right opportunity. And this works for the physical and the mental health. And you said it so eloquently, which is, I'm laying there thinking, I just need more rest. And my momentum, my mobility, all my good things that I should be getting out of movement are no longer with me, because I'm thinking I'm healing, but I'm actually destroying. And so let's go back to that. And then I want you to walk me through some of the things that are put first and foremost is, and I respectfully am very cognizant that there are times when medications are 100% absolutely necessary. And I don't want our audience to think that we're downplaying the impact that medication can have. What I am saying is, the body has a wonderful opportunity to heal. And I want you to share, Eric, some of that experience that you had.
Absolutely. So it led towards me being recommended to do, I was ending at the impact point, shock therapy. at a psych ward, right? Like, who wants to openly admit, hey, I'm Eric and I went into the psych ward, right? Like, the name itself is already like so off-putting. But I met with, at was not going to give the name right now, but what was considered the top, or one of the top treatment facility centers here in the Northeast. And I met with the attending psychiatrist the first day, and she looks at my chart. I'm looking at her top doctor plaques on the wall, and she looks back at me and she says, Eric, you've tried everything there is. Your last resort is to do shock therapy. Now think about that, and hearing last resort. You're stubborn. You're willing to try anything. The joke that I always tell is, living in New York City, I'll go to Central Park and eat scoops of the horse's manure. If there's minerals in that are going to make my brain feel better, sign me up for it. And here this woman's telling me, this is your last resort, right? No one else on the psych ward floor was getting shock therapy, so I had no one to lean out to. This is now 2017 at this point, because it's 2.5 years later after the symptoms first started. And I don't have a friend that I could reach out to. Hey, when you took shock therapy, like, like you can't lean out to anyone. And so I did the 12 sessions over 5 weeks of getting my brain shocked into seizure. Happy to go into detail on that, but for brevity of the story, I'll skip it for now. And left the hospital feeling no better after those 12 sessions, thinking, as I retreated back to the twin bed I was laying in my childhood home that I grew up in, my life is over unless Merck or Pfizer invents some miracle pill that pops me out of this thing that I'm being told, which is I'm called treatment resistant. I'm never going to get better. Right?
Oh, treatment resistant. See, that just, that makes it even worse, because now you've got the stigma on top of the stigma. It's like, what is wrong with me? Why am I not? Why is the options that have been given to me not working?
The options not given to me working, and then you're seeing other people who are, on the psych ward floor, who are coloring in little, coloring books, and like that's their activity to quiet their brain. You're like, that doesn't seem like that's going to work for me, that alone. Like, why am I the only one who needs? So I think I'm the most messed up of the messed up people, back to your point of this concept of what stigma is. And so, I think things happen serendipitously. And my parents are both former educators. And father was a principal, mother was a language teacher. And so they go to these continuing education courses all this time. And so luck would have it, they get invited to go to this course called integrative breathing practices. Okay. And I didn't know what the term integrative meant, and I'd never done a breathing practice, and my brain was offline at the time. So I didn't think much of it when they were going to this course. And I remember my mother comes back. You're a 36-year-old person at this point. You're living in your parents' house because your brain's not functioning. You don't feel right at all after you've had a successful independent career up until that point. You don't want to hear from your parents. Like, I remember my mom runs up into the room. She's like, Eric, we met this doctor. She's a psychologist. She treats differently than all these other people you've been to. Please go see her. Please go see her. Okay, I'll give it a shot. So 3 days later, I find myself on her couch, and I'm expecting, important thing probably for the audience to hear, because you really seem to latch on to the comment about treatment resistant. Mm-hmm. Every doctor I'd been to up until that point, for the 2.5-year period, these top doctors in New York, not just that one hospital that I was experienced, the cadence and the order of the questions were the same way. Eric, what are your symptoms? Brain fog, cognitive fatigue, don't have an ability to have original thoughts come to my mind, can't have conversations. Okay, based on your symptoms, your diagnosis is, and I was diagnosed with everything from melancholic depression to anhedonic depression to PTSD to OCD to ADD to ADHD to, you name it, like I had the acronyms and the letters there, right? Mm-hmm. And then based on your diagnosis, here's how we're going to treat you. And it would usually be a whiteboard. That's why I ended up trying 50 different psychotropic drugs, because each of them would cross off. Okay, you already did Lexapro. Let's go to Zoloft. Wait, you already did all these SSRIs. Let's go to the SNRIs, right? And I'll share with you, I'm still on a little bit of medication. So I'll get to you in terms of my opinion, what medication does for people. I'm not anti-med. I'm anti the way that med is marketed. But I sat with this woman, and instead of her asking those same questions that all those doctors had, she didn't psychoanalyze me. She sat me on the couch and she said, Eric, I want to get to know you, the person. Tell me about yourself.
Isn't that beautiful? I mean, from what you've just been saying, it comes to, I'm not my symptoms. I'm a human being, an outstanding individual who has done incredible things. And I'm working my butt off to try to get well. And all I get is, here's your symptoms. Here's the pill, right?
maybe because they only have 30 minutes based on what insurance allows them to ask me what's going on, so they can try and throw the right dart at the dartboard to give me the right pill. But yes, she made it seem like, and also versus a Freudian talk therapist, let's call it counseling, right? For lack of a better term. She didn't start by saying like, tell me about your relationship with your mother going back to early childhood, right? Like it was just like, hey, let me know about you. And I think what the beauty of that was, I still arrived at similar places I would have that I didn't with other talk therapists. But because she gave me the blank slate to be able to go there, I said, oh, I'm the middle of 3 boys. We're a sports crazed family. My older brother. And then I just start going to my earliest memories. And then here's what just comes out of my mouth. And as I share this, I want everyone to realize like, I'm the only one who lived that life, and I've never lived another life. So I didn't think of this as this is any different. I just thought this is the life I've lived. So start telling her when I was 8 years old, my older brother got into a sporting accident, broke his femur bone, was put in a body cast for a year and homeschooled for a year. Healed from that, and a month later got diagnosed with ALL, children's form of leukemia, which in the late 80s, not the best prognosis when you have children's leukemia. Family all scared what might happen. 5 years later, tons of chemo, radiation appointments, goes into remission. So everyone's celebrating. As if there's a cadence to it. A month later, he's in a Jeep Wrangler with his friends, open top, open back, no seatbelt. Car loses control. He flies out of the back on the Meadowbrook Parkway here in New York, lands on his head, cracks his head open, loses partial vision in his eyes, in ICU for a month. Oh. Heals from that, goes to college. Between junior and senior years, feeling a pain in his knee. They do all sports medicine testing. That comes back negative, and they do more blood tests, find out that his cancer from childhood's returned. So now, having cancer the second time and the same type, they really want to knock the cancerous cells out of his body so it never returns again. The drugs are much stronger than they were from a decade before, so they give him a much stronger chemo treatment. And it's doing a good job on lowering the cell counts, right, that they want to see lowered. But what do we also know about chemo is it targets a lot of the healthy cells. And so, yes, his hair is falling out like it did before, but it's also breaking down his joints. And he's not. Meanwhile, a year and a half into this, he's at Hofstra Law School. He's making law review. Like, so incredible, like what he's accomplishing. I always like to share that. But I get a call from my father. I'm up at college right now that he's got 105 fever. They're bringing him to the hospital. It sends his body into septic shock, and septic shock into a coma. And so he's in a coma, and the neurologist is telling us they don't know if he's going to wake, and if he does wake, if he's going to have any brain activity. And so that goes on for 3 months. We don't know, what's going to happen. Miraculously wakes. Another kind of little, comedic break here is he asks if the Yankees won the World Series. That's the first question that comes out of him.
He's good. He's really, really good.
Yeah, right. So his cognitive faculties are back, but his kidneys have failed from the rigor of the septic shock, needs to go on dialysis. We all get tested to see who's the closest match. My father donates a kidney to him. That all ends. I get that job at the NBA league office at a school. And that first year, 3 of my close friends, misdiagnosed or undiagnosed heart conditions, pass away ages 22 and 23 years old.
Oh, dear.
And so I share that story only because that was just what was coming out of my, they say trauma, Velcros to trauma. One memory was coming out after another memory. And if you notice, I wasn't sharing anything. Here's the sports I played growing up. Here's the Scholar Athlete Award that I won. Here's the college that I got into. None of that was coming out of my head when she asks me about myself. She just let me go, and these things are just pouring out of me, right? And so her reaction is, Eric, what else happened to you in your childhood that impacted your mental health that you want to tell me about? And this is where it shows my naivete at the time. This is only 2017. And I said, impacted my mental health. Like, I wasn't on the bed with my brother when he was in the coma. I wasn't in the car when he flew out of the Jeep. I wasn't on the treadmill with my friend when he collapsed. And I'm 35, 36 right now. And I just said to you what happened to me between the ages of 8 and 23. Meanwhile, I've been seeing doctors the last 2.5 years who have only been asking about my symptoms. Why are you making the connection between what happened to me between 8 and 23 and what I'm feeling right now? That doesn't make sense to me. So this is where she tells me about Bessel van der Kolk, and she tells me about the body keeps score. And she starts going into, Eric, your brain is a video camera, and the video camera doesn't have a delete button that you automatically just press delete and it goes away. And so, to her credit, because she's not a sports fan, she was able to speak in my terms. And she said, if you had a front row seat for an NBA basketball game and these athletes that are 7 feet tall are running up and down the court, and you're entertaining a client in your suit, and as they're running up and down the court, the sweat from their running up and down is hitting your suit, or they dive for a loose ball and they land on you and your suit gets all sweaty. You're going to go home that night after 3 hours of the game, maybe 5 hours because you worked extra late. You're going to take your suit off. You're going to get it ready for the dry cleaner. You're going to take a shower and you're going to put a new suit on the next day, come in, look like you're brand new. The difference here is you had a front row seat, but you had a front row seat for the game of life. And the game of life is being depicted as a muddy wrestling match where your brother's in one ring in front of you and your friends are in the other ring. And every move your brother makes to stay alive, from everything that the game of life is doing aggressively to take him down, your brother's pinning the game of life. He's staying alive, but the mud is splattering and you're in that front row seat. And now it's mud that's hitting you instead of that sweat from the players. And every time your friends make a move to stay alive, the mud is splattering and it's hitting you. And the biggest difference between this game and the basketball game is you're not getting up from that seat after 3 hours. You're staying in that seat and you're watching the action over and over and over again. And this is why I'm telling you what happened between the ages of 8 and 23 have now impacted you at 35. That mud built up so much that you've never done anything in your life, not to your fault, just no one's ever told you about it, to take a hard brush and start to scrub that mud off your body. So anytime you took a step up to take a move to go anywhere, eventually it got to the point at 35 when you were in that office in Florida where the mud just became too heavy and your myopic focus on your career, because that's what brought you joy every day, could no longer be what kept you afloat. The mud just got too heavy and it took you down and you had this incredible decline, almost what felt like overnight to you. So I'll stop there because I see you, you're reacting.
Well, it's a lot. This is very heavy. And I absolutely think the audience here, we all have those moments of aha, what a fabulous physician. Step one. Step two, what an amazing moment for you to get this analogy that really works. And the third thing that I just heard was, it's a Velcro experience. They Velcro onto one another. And so many of us just say, oh, you know what? Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, suck it up, buttercup, you've got this. Those things really don't add to the outcome of your life. You're trying to figure out, why am I so heavy? Well, you got 5 layers of mud. And what's really interesting, Eric, as you say it, is your brother's perspective is totally different. And you see it through the lens of your eyes. You feel it through the heaviness because you weren't experiencing the stress he was having while he was in a coma. But I want every audience member to hear this is, because you didn't experience it doesn't mean you didn't process it. And that's where the mud gets heavy. And that's where the Velcro sticks. And in today's society, there is a lot of mud out there being thrown here, there, and everywhere. So you brought me to a place now where I feel like it's almost like a Marvel movie, like that character who's stuck in the cement is breaking loose. So now, Eric, tell me when the light bulb goes on.
The average 15-year-old, let alone 35-year-old, if you're saying just sitting in a seat watching other people go through things can impact us, then the average 15-year-old who's watched their parents get into fights and have a divorce, the average 15-year-old who watched their parents lose the job and then potentially lose the house, the average 15-year-old who watched their 2 best friends get into a fight and that friendship dissolve, or their best friend get into a breakup at a young love and that crushed that best friend, or the best friend being verbally abused on the schoolyard or being bullied or cyberbullied, or hearing about their friend being sexually abused, or watching their friend deal with the loss of a loved one or sickness of a loved one. I was like, do you want me to keep going on? Because the list is a mile long. I said, that would lead me to believe that everyone's mental health is impacted. And I've never heard that before. So it helped me reconcile this. And so she takes a deep breath and she says, Eric, I'm an integrative practitioner. I believe in a mind-body connection. I believe everything we see, as you just described it, Sherry, impacts us and we hold on to it. And so, yes, it is cumulative and everyone is moving somewhere on this continuum. No, our society doesn't understand that. And this is where you'll like the healing part of it. She says, before you start thinking about how does this impact society and how do we start attacking this issue, because I could tell you like diving in and figuring out puzzles, can we help you get better first, right? So she has me go to a weekend breathing course 3 days later, where I show up in this old karate studio that this nonprofit organization had rented out. And I'm the only man, only one under 40 at the time, and only one born in this country. So it's me and 8 Indian women and 9 yoga mats,
Fantastic.
Which is another indictment on how our society here in the West does not take this stuff seriously and doesn't find the tools or doesn't know about the tools that are available until, like you said, we hit a brick wall. But so for these 8 women and for the instructor, this was a practice that they knew already. They were just coming back to get a refresher. For me, it's the first time. And so I'm sitting there like a kid in the science class in 9th grade biology being like, how does the heart work? You know, like I'm asking all these questions, and this isn't the way that they would describe it. But now looking back on it, at least in this course, I learned about vagal nerve function. And
very good.
I learned because my question is, if I breathe every single day already, why is learning how to breathe from you going to make me feel better? That doesn't make sense. I'm already breathing every day. And obviously you find out it's the way you breathe, right? The 3 days of doing the course, I don't feel any better. And I joked with everyone because everyone's like, I want to go back from seeing life in standard definition to high definition. And I go, I want to go back from having no picture on my screen to seeing static, right? And like,
yes,
that's the reality. But I stuck with it. And they, to their credit of this organization, they have accountability partners that you stay with. Sorry for the sirens in the background. If you could hear that, I'm New York City, sometimes it's a little loud. But I stay with it through accountability partners. And back to diffusion, the rest of the day, I'm a mess. But for 45 minutes of the day, I've got an exercise to learn how to start to normalize and cleanse. And what you were talking about with the BEAM acronym, to start to allow my body to come back to center and heal itself. And I wake up on the 30th day. It was exactly the 30th day of doing the practice. And it was like Christmas morning or Hanukkah night, whatever you celebrate for me. I looked at my controller and I go, I want to turn the TV on. And that felt amazing. And then the other thought that came to me was, I want to have scrambled eggs for breakfast, and an urge and a desire to eat a certain food. So when you go 2.5 years not feeling any of that, your appreciation for the little things that come back that you took for granted before, it's incredible. You want to soak in every possible feeling that you can have. And so, you know, where the story now goes from a healing journey perspective is, I wasn't a social media person at the time. I didn't have Instagram or Twitter, even though this is middle of 2017. And so I had LinkedIn. Like, that was the only way that sports executives connected. And part of me wanted to share my story now that I'm cognitively a little bit better, even though emotionally I still wasn't there, because I wanted people to know where the hell I've been for the last 2.5 years. Like, why did you just fall off the face of the earth after you read all these conferences and stuff? And then the second, and I would like to believe the most important part, was, how do I help people? Right. And not in like the cliche, if only I could help one person. I was like, I feel like I found some information out here. I'd like to help a lot of people. So I write my story, and believe it or not, a lot more detail than I just shared with you right now. It takes 35 minutes to read it. And I put it on LinkedIn with an attachment to go and read it. Well, it gets clicked on, I don't know, fully read over 150,000 times in 3 days, just because people just keep sharing it.
Yes.
And I get over 400 calls that come in. And here's my self-deprecating comment, so people don't think that's a braggadocious number in social media world. I'm not Edgar Allan Poe, right? Like, that's not why people were reading it. They were reading it because there was a relatability to it. And especially in the sports world, this was before Kevin Love had come out with his story and a number of athletes. So here's like sports executive that, holy shit, like, he was in a C-level position. What is it about this? What can I learn? And the 400 calls, obviously I didn't get able to get back in touch with everyone because some people fall off a little bit, but I'd say about 300 calls back over about a 2.5 week span in an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm writing down the comments that I'm getting from people. And I'm thinking to myself, why are these people calling me and they've never been to a doctor or they've never gotten help? I'm nobody. I'm just a name to them that they saw on LinkedIn. Well, what they were sharing with me was, I did not get a single, this is going to sound hyperbolic, I did not get a single mention of disorder in the opening from any of them. I didn't get Eric, you ultimately were diagnosed with PTSD after all this. I have PTSD also. Or Eric, I have bipolar. It's different than PTSD in this way. None of that. Instead, everyone was sharing a lived experience with me. Eric, I lost a child to SIDS 5 years ago, and I've never been the same since. What you're feeling sounds eerily similar. I'm a married mother of 3 kids. My husband is amazing. He's my soulmate, but I broke up with my college boyfriend 10 years ago after dating him for 4 years in school. And that knot in my stomach from the morning of making that decision has stayed with me. I can't get that knot out of my stomach, and I wake up with it every single day. And, Malcolm Gladwell has the whole thing, 10,000 hours. I didn't spend 10,000 hours doing it. I only spent 2.5 weeks. But you hear from people enough, and you're spending your whole day doing this as you're calling people back, you start to realize patterns. And the pattern in my mind that became clear was mental illness is not what ties people together. Disorder is not what ties people together. In fact, the names of disorder bucket people and put them into silos. What ties the human condition together is this thing called challenging life events, lived experiences. Call them stress, call them trauma. I don't even love trauma alone, because I think the whole ACE concept doesn't take into account things like I'm on an airplane and I experienced turbulence as a young kid, and I don't know how to explain to other people that scares me. So now every time I see an airplane, my fight flight response goes significantly up. That's trauma. Whether people want to admit that or not, that's traumatic to our body. And that doesn't get captured in an ACE score, which asks about how many divorces in your family, how many people did you lose in your family, right? So you combine all this together, and my reaction was, well, if challenging life events is the common thread that ties the human condition together, and even though they happen at different times in our lives and to different levels, we'll never be able to measure those levels one person to the next. Mm-hmm. That's not a fair thing to do. Who's talking about it this way? Because back to what I said to my doctor, the whole world, it sounds like, is going through this, but I'm not seeing that in any of the messages. So I go to the largest nonprofit websites in the country, and I promise you, my thought process was, I worked in sports. I'll go back to working in sports. I'll give my sports contacts to the organization that's talking about it in this way. As long as I can find them, I'll feel like I've done my debt to society in terms of helping raise the profile on those messages, and I'll go back to working in sports. And here's what I noticed on all these websites. 3 main things that are still part of the messages 4 years later, front and center, that are consistent on all these websites that I think move us further away from healing instead of coming together. First is the statistic, 1 in 5 people are mentally ill. That is a green light to tell society this is a binary topic. You're either in the 1 in 5 group and you're mentally ill, or you're in the 4 in 5 group. And if you're in the 4 in 5 group, what are you? And every time I ask that question in a room, healthy, fine, normal, okay. And then my joke is, find me a person who's normal, and I'd like to meet that person, right?
That's exactly right. My first thought is, having practiced for 25 years and knowing my chiropractic colleagues out there would also is, every single patient is unique. It's like a fingerprint, and everybody keeps the trauma, and their bodies reflect that trauma. Their bodies hold on to stress. There's trigger points and scar tissue. Why wouldn't that be the same for our mental health? So please, you're right on task on that one. I totally agree with you.
Okay. So we're in agreement on the 1 in 5 versus the 4 in 5 binary, 2 different categories. Now, to make matters worse, number 2, I notice every campaign is an action word followed by stigma. So stop the stigma, stomp the stigma, break the stigma, erase the stigma. The term stigma is formed by human beings, right? Like, human beings are the ones who make opinions and judgments. It's not my microphone. It's not the computer. It's human beings. So if we have a group of human beings on the corner being like, stop the stigma, or on their social media profiles, hashtag stop stigma, what is that message getting across to the 80% of our population that doesn't take mental health into consideration? It's all of a sudden, whoa, hold on a second. Who's stigmatizing you? Are you pointing the finger at me? So now it's taking this binary topic and it's making the binary ends further from one another. You're forming a greater division between the two. Third thing that I noticed is all the way that they were sharing celebrity stories. They were doing things like, great news, Britney Spears is part of our 1 in 5 group. She's got depression too. Oh. Lindsay Lohan is part of our 1 in 5 group. She's got anxiety too, right? And then they would link to an Us Weekly or People magazine article, because that's the only way that they had some information on what those people were going through. And the narrative, this goes back to the beginning part of the common symptoms we have. The narrative was not common symptoms because that's not what gets people to click. So it was the formula that I say that the media shares is celebrity name plus disordered name plus erratic behavior. So Britney Spears has depression, shaves her head. Lindsay Lohan has anxiety, dresses like a hot mess. Now you go even into social media now. Kanye West has bipolar, says crazy things about his family, thinks he can run for president. Kevin Love has anxiety and panic attack, runs off the basketball court in a panic attack. There's my doggy. So you add all these things up. 1 in 5 are mentally ill. Let's stop stigmatizing that group of 1 in 5. And the 1 in 5 looks like people who shave their heads, run off basketball courts, and in Charlie Sheen's case, look like a skeleton because they have addiction when they leave the house in the morning. How many people are actively raising their hand being like, let me go to the chiropractor today. Let me go to the mental health professional today. People don't want to be associated and part of that group. They want to feel bad for that group, right? So society's gotten better to that place, but they don't want to be in that group. And so the concept of we're all a little crazy, right? Crazy in quotes, as you, thank you for the way that you described the beginning. And the movement, the campaign being same here is, this is not a 1 in 5 topic. It's a 5 in 5 topic. There's not an individual on this planet whose mental health has not been impacted. How much more collective of a message is that than stop the stigma against that 1 in 5 group, right? So that was the impetus behind forming an organization, because I just got so frustrated when I said to you I was going to go back in sports that there wasn't a message out there that was talking collectively and collaboratively about mental health on a continuum and was showing this wall of people with platforms that are all saying, I'm part of this team too. I'm part of this group also. Join us, right? Like, we collect people because we all go through challenges. We all tell our stories. And, you know, even to today, and I'll get into more, probably a little more questions on the actual healing modalities themselves. But even today, I'll share this with everyone who's listening, is the way in which the media still portrays mental health. We're like patting ourselves on the back being like, more people are opening up. This is great. Like the mental health movement's going in the right direction.
Now I'm going to have you jump for me into an understanding of the turning point, the healing journey that you started with something that seems to many just very simple, the breathing. We have lots of yoga instructors out there sharing their stories and how just starting at the basics. Apple Watch clearly wants you to breathe. But a lot of us don't even understand the mechanisms of just simple breathing and why it's so important. And then you get to this next step of utilizing a lot of different therapies and realizing, wouldn't it have been nice if someone had started with a non-pharmacological approach first before we just diagnosed my symptoms? But sharing with you a very kind and open, honest conversation of who you are, some of the mud that's on you, and what are the next steps. So explain to me in kind of a nutshell, as you started to lift the mud off, what were some of the things that you really saw to yourself, this is really helping?
So that doctor that in the hospital told me this was my last resort, the first integrative psychiatrist I went to, so the psychologist recommended me to a psychiatrist, and leaving his session, he said, Eric, here's 15 things you can do. And I want you to know after that, there's 15 more and there's 15 more. As a patient, want everyone who's a chiropractor or any type of doctor out there hear that options are what gives hope. We don't think of doctors as, you don't know what you're talking about because you have so many things you could think of me. Why can't you give me a direct one? We want to know that if this doesn't work, there's going to be something else out there. And so I continued with the breathing practice when I was with this integrative psychiatrist, and he put me on something called an alpha stim machine as well, which helps realign the brain waves to move and oscillate more in alpha speed, which is more of a calm and relaxed speed, than beta mode, which is when we're in that fight flight situation. I was put on some supplements, a 7-keto DHEA, which helps with my cortisol levels, was taking a SAMe product as well. But I had a thirst for, if I'm understanding the science of how that helped my vagus nerve, what else is out there that I can do that feels like it's activities for this brain body connection, so that if the breathing doesn't work for me in the future, or I get bored of it, or I want to try something different, or it doesn't work for someone else and I'm trying to make a recommendation, what else could they use? So I go to Jakarta, Indonesia to learn Qigong meditation from a Qigong, master. And I'm the only one speaking English in this class. Then I go to Arizona to learn, TRE from a guy named David Bercelli, who invented the practice. And I start learning about tapping, and I go to someone who invented actually havening, Dr. Ronald Rudin. And I start to bring this idea together. You mentioned yoga. One of the women that's on our alliance is Amy Weintraub, who helped very much start to normalize yoga here in the States. Amy is called Life Force Yoga. Is I started to realize, if I went to the gym for my body and my goals were I want to lose weight, I want to put on muscle, right? And for other people, it's different. I want to put on weight, or I want to, get my muscles more cut up. I know it's slightly different for each of us. But I said, if I go to the gym, there's options across the entire gym. If I want to get my cardio up, there's a treadmill, a elliptical, there's a bicycle, there's a rowing machine, right? There's all these different, and then if I want to put weight on and build my muscles, there's a bench press, a tricep pull down, a bicep, curl. There's free weights versus universal. Where is that for my brain and my brain body connection? And so that's where learning these different modalities, the Qigong, the yin yoga, the tapping, the EMDR, the havening, even going to things like EEG, right? The alpha stim machine. It was putting together this program of stuff that gave me options that we ended up putting an acronym around that we call STAR. So STAR, stands for stress and trauma, active, release, and rewiring. And
I love it. Can you say it one more time for my audience?
STAR. Yeah, STAR stands for stress and trauma, active, release, and rewiring. So we're doing active practices to release and rewire out the stress and trauma that's Velcroed in and built in our central nervous system.
Everybody needs hope, the option. Can you give the audience a couple ways as they're leaving today on thinking of, where do I start? Literally, if I'm on my back, thinking about, why is tomorrow going to come and what do I care? To, hey, I'm maximizing my performance. I'm an athlete and I have that moment of, I'm stuck. Yeah. Where would you guide our audience for the next steps?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Thanks for that question, because it leads to so many things I could think of. The first is, we have this thing called the Same Here scale. It's 6 places. It's horizontal, where the left side starts with thriving, an emoji face related to thriving. It goes thriving, gliding, surviving, fluctuating, struggling, sinking. And what you're describing for that person who's laying in that bed, where we don't all get to that place. So I'll go into where hope comes from in each of the spots, not in full detail to bore you, but the sinking place with how our neurobiology gets affected over time is, if you notice, struggling happens right before sinking. Struggling is, I feel overwhelmed, emotional, I'm antsy, I get very angered and short-tempered when people bring things up to me. I don't have the patience that I had before. That's not the final spot we end up in when we're at our worst place. Where we end up at in our worst place is, I've been so that way for so long, I'm just done now. I'm done with the world. I'm spent. I can't take it anymore. Doing the slightest little thing feels like an impossibility to me. Why is mentioning that point part of hope? Because it's validating. Because then you know that I'm not the only person in the world who's feeling in this spot. You know that that's a place on this continuum that we all lay on. And if you know it's a spot that's on that continuum we all lay on, you know that there's places to the left that we can move on that continuum. We could go back to struggling, back to fluctuating, back to surviving, and getting into better places over time by working on ourselves, right? So that visualization, number one. Number two is not thinking that how I'm feeling right now is going to be how I'm going to feel the rest of my life. And I can say that to you until you're blue in the face, but you need to keep hearing that from people and absorb it and hear my voice on repeat say it. If you don't have someone in your life say it to you, because here's what happens when we get to that sinking phase. Our brains goes to this place called irrationality, where the reward centers aren't there. And when the reward centers aren't there, your brain can't fathom how 1 + 1 = 2. It doesn't make sense to you. So you say, you'll watch something on TV and you'll say, that person's enjoying watching that basketball game. That doctor's enjoying delivering that message. I can't ever fathom enjoying doing something ever again. So you look at that and you're in that spot and you say, what's my point of continuing on if I can't even imagine that my brain can get to that spot? And so what I want people to hear so loudly is, in that moment, your brain is lying to you. Your brain is not telling you what reality is. And if you could understand that, hearing from someone who can see the world through reality right now, and by the way, is at full possibility of falling back to that place, because we're all susceptible at any point in our lives.
Exactly.
I know I'm susceptible, which is why I need to keep working on it myself. But know that I've been in that spot. I hear you, I see you, but that spot is not what the actual reality is. You can and will pull out of that spot where you'll start to see those things and enjoy them again and be motivated by things. And that the last thing I'll say is, because you asked for 2 or 3, is the hope that comes out of this when you're laying in that bed is to think about the perspective that you gain from having been through something so awful is going to make your life that much richer and better when you get out of this. Because I gave the example of the controller and the scrambled eggs. What will have been taken away from you that you then get back, even if you don't ever get back to the quote ability to feel at the same level that you did before. And quite candidly, I haven't. I don't have as high highs and as low lows. However, my appreciation for that I can have a feeling hugging my niece again, and that feeling is called love, is so appreciative because I didn't have that before, right? For that 2.5 years. So you're never going to look at life the same, which is going to now give you a gift. That gift is a superpower, because perspective is the greatest human superpower. And so hopefully that's helpful to everyone, is that you're going through a struggle now. There's a reason why you're going through a struggle. You're going to get out of it. Don't listen to those irrational thoughts. Talk back to those irrational thoughts. And if you need to hear my voice playing over and over again in your head, do that in order to remind yourself that it's not going to be like this forever.
Bingo. Back to adjusted reality, when the awesomeness of the stress that can come, especially since our society right now has a trifecta of chaos. We have a pandemic, we have an epidemic of opioid use, misuse, and abuse, and then we layer that on a mental health crisis for many across the nation. And Eric, I think you did a fabulous job of bringing people where you were at, walking them through the growth patterns and the opportunities that exist, and always reflecting back to something so important. I want to sincerely thank you. I think you need to write a book. And if you already have, please forgive me, I don't have the title, but I would love to get you back. I know our audience is going to love to hear more about some of the techniques, some of the things that you've already tried and what you learned from those. I know Dr. John Rosa has been a major influence in your life as well, and as a chiropractor and an advocate for helping people with opioid issues and trying to get the government agencies to recognize non-pharmacological options for the body. And we're talking about the body in pain, which mental and physical come together. We can't take those two apart, is so important. Eric, absolute pleasure. You're a true gem to adjusted reality. And I hope you'll come back. And did I miss it? Is there a book out there?
Oh, no, well, thanks for bringing it up. When I started this platform, I wrote my whole experience. It's 400 pages. I was just told by people who are in the space, build this thing called a platform before, you put a book out there, because you don't want to just do a self-publishing thing. If someone's got a different idea of how to do that, let me know. But, or if someone's in the publishing space, the book's written because I went through that experience. Right. And I put it down there, but it's been more, I spend my time on the road presenting and talking with people and doing in-person stuff. So
can you guide our audience to where your site is? Share with our audience where they can go to find more.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So the website is samehereglobal.org. So SAMEHERE global.org. And all of our social handles where I would say come not because of follower numbers and stuff like that, because people are actually having conversations with each other. It's a safe place to talk. It's beautiful. Is at @samehere_global. So Instagram, Facebook, and then Twitter. Twitter's not always the friendliest, but certainly Instagram and Facebook, a lot of awesome conversations happening, and would love to see people there.
Fantastic. Well, Adjusted Reality audience, you heard it here first with Eric. There's places to go. Our body and our mind are connected. And I want to thank you again, Eric, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for mentioning Dr. Rosa, a big fan of all the group of you together. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for tuning in to Adjusted Reality as we spoke to Eric Kussin about finding hope when you feel all options are exhausted. Recall his acronym STAR. Remember that he said there is always hope. There are options after options available for you. And do reflect that life is fluid. You are not stuck where you are. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Adjusted Reality as much as I did. This podcast was brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. As a special gift for listening today, you can visit f4cp.org/health to get a copy of our Mind, Body, Spirit ebook, which focuses on many ways to optimize your health and the ones you love without the use of drugs or surgery. Don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast with family and friends. You do not know who needs this message more now than ever, so please do share, rate, and review. If you're feeling so inspired to learn more about chiropractic or to find a doctor of chiropractic near you, visit f4cp.org/find-a-doctor. We appreciate your support and look forward to checking in with you again soon.